I want to let folks know we are at 10:40, which is when our breakout groups are supposed to start. But let's just take one question and then we'll head off into our groups, and hopefully people will just be all ready to continue the discussion in your groups. And so let's go to this question. I guess actually let me check in real quick. Lee, you answered a question by text. Do you want to expand on that at all? Just like a minute.
Oh, definitely. More. So the question was, and this is not the first time I've heard this question, is how does Microsoft keep its competitive advantage when there's so many other companies that aren't having the requirements that we have in terms of going through these reviews and aligning these principles? Can Microsoft really have a competitive advantage when there's other companies that are just willing to, you have someone that asks for something, they just put it, they just deliver it. Whereas it's not that case here at Microsoft anymore. And my answer, and as I stated in a very long-winded way, but it was a complex question, my answer is I do believe Microsoft keeps its competitive advantage, because what we're hearing from organizations is that they want to do the right thing. Many people just aren't aware that their technologies that they have, that they're designing and building for good reasons. They actually think, boy, this is great technology, that there's all types of unintended consequences that can happen once you put that technology out there if you don't think about those things in advance. People want to do the right thing. They're just not even aware. You don't know what you don't know. So as this is coming to the forefront, and as Microsoft is pushing back, especially on projects that are coming in from customers that we need to take a closer look at, they're saying, I didn't even think about that. Thank you so much. And by the way, we've even had customers that say, hey, I have this other project, that I'm thinking about. Can you help me frame it in a way that's also responsible? So to me, is it hurting our competitive advantage? No, I think it's helping it. And it's also drawing attention to the broader industry that it's not just one company that needs to do this, that all of these organizations, and even academia, as was mentioned in the question, all organizations need to get involved, and we need to do this as a society to make sure these technologies are beneficial and not harmful.
Yeah. Thank you for the clarification on that. That's helpful. And Teresa, I know you got a question also that you answered in the chat. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah. The question was about are there tools that are bent towards more equity? The closest thing that I've seen that is bent towards equity uses the power of people to build those systems. And so I really like tools that are crowdsourced, because I can't trust small numbers of people to be anti-racist. It feels better to say the more people, the more inclusion, the more representation I have. And then if I provide that feedback loop. So crowdsourcing as a technological feature is a really interesting one for MHA. As a protective factor. And the other one is just a lot of companies kind of come and ask us if we can promote their work. And I often ask, like, well, what's your protocol? Is it something that you're going to sell to healthcare systems that are then going to put this on patients and like force us into these systems? And I much prefer systems that are business to consumer models. I want people to decide to opt in, to say, this is something that I personally like, that I'm willing to use, because for us, it reduces the risk of cascading harm done if the user is in the safety of their own home and using products for their own mental health. So at least those are two development side features that I look at, and then systemic issues that we have wrestled with. So, yeah.
And I think then that kind of speaks to the personalization that Ehi was talking about and realized in her studies. And so Ehi, a couple questions came in for you. One was, in data collection and in algorithmic design, how do y'all account for deficit models or pathologies assumed to be inherent of the population to be studied?
That's a good question. I think in some way, it's kind of hard to do that, right? Because really what the models end up what the models end up using to make their decisions or to reach their come up to their conclusions is really what they see. And unfortunately, we know that the data that we capture, or the data, is just a snapshot of an individual's life, right? So we really cannot, to a large extent, account for some of these inherent pathologies that are there. One good thing, though, is like there are some features that end up encoding some of these things in a way that maybe not that indirectly. And I can't really think of any examples off the top of my head for healthcare. But if you think about, like, for example, if you use a zip code, that can also encode like socioeconomic status, or, you know, the kind of communities that are in there. And I know there are some of those things that exist in healthcare as well. So that's some way, like, and is really not perfect, but that's some of how that plays out. Also, you know, +1 for cultural competencies. Sometimes when you're working in communities that you're familiar with, you can say, oh, by the way, this is sort of what they're dealing with. This is what you should expect to see. This is what the data is not capturing. And you can account for that when you're developing your models.
And one more question for Ehi, and then we'll wrap and get to our breakout groups. This one's from Gina. Thank you for helping us understand the potential issues with the whole AI development process. There are platforms or policies in place that doesn't allow the collection of demographics data, for example, anonymous posts on mental health Reddit group. How should we approach these data sets or platforms? Should we be pushing for such collection? How do we know who we're learning insights about with such data?
That is a very good question. And yes, that is part of the problem, right? Because I guess because of the way society is set up, oftentimes people just think that we shouldn't even be collecting this data in the first place. We should, you know, completely be blind. But I think recently we're seeing that there's no such thing as blind technology, right? Whether or not you're collecting this demographic information, it is encoded in that data set. And so I personally prefer that you're aware of what you're dealing with, but that's not often the case. So I guess, like, no data is perfect, and we absolutely can't throw it out. Like, we have to use what we have to use. But this is where I think, you know, and I probably sound like a broken record, but representation really helps, right? Because, I mean, I'm not on Twitter a lot, but Black Twitter is very different from mainstream Twitter, right? So, like, if you have people who sort of understand the nuances in communication, the way people communicate, I am Nigerian, the way I communicate is very different. The way I express myself is very different. I can definitely identify a Nigerian based on a post. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a word that only Nigerians use, right? Even without them self-identifying as a Nigerian. And it's hard, like, you can't have, you know, representation in everything. But one, being humble enough to acknowledge that we have biases, we have blind spots. We're not going to, you know, we don't have all of the answers, we don't have all the information. And I feel like when we approach these platforms and these studies with that level of awareness, we're going to be a little bit more comfortable, or we're going to be a little bit more careful and about the conclusions that we're drawing from these models, right? So if you know that you know maybe this particular community may have been sidelined, then when you are drawing conclusions, you're not generalizing to everyone, right? Like, you're being more careful about what you're doing. Yeah. So awareness, I think, is really key here.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. I mean, so we've heard a lot the last few days about being anti-racist and how proactive that is. And that applies to everything we do, including all how we build these models, how we build everything. So there's a lot to do. And yes, okay. I know we're a little over here, and so I want to make sure. So I just thank you, Ehi, and thank you, Lee, and thank you, Teresa. We are going to go back into our breakout groups. You will be in the same breakout group that you were on Tuesday. And so everything should just be pretty much the same. We are going a little earlier than we did. Part of that is because we're coming back earlier. Instead of just a half hour at the end of the day to kind of report back, we want to have a bigger town hall. So we'll get each group to report back again in 3 to 5 minutes. And then we just want to talk about how do we continue this conversation. And as part of that, everyone will be receiving a link to a survey. We not only want your feedback on how this event went, ideas for future events, but also how do we keep the work going. We want this to be a sustained effort, not a one-time thing. And that's part of, how do we develop our report together? And some of that is for the small groups to decide on your own what works best for each of your groups and your topics. And then the facilitators will be stitching together all the documents that everyone produce. So with that, please head off to your small groups, and thank you all. Thank you to our speakers, and we will see you all in the groups. Also, each group, you're responsible for figuring out your own break time. We broke yesterday from 11 to 11:30 Pacific. We're pretty close to 11, so folks, you might want to just kind of hop on a call and figure out where you all are at in terms of time zone and breaks. But we will be reconvening as a larger group at, what is this, 12:30 Pacific, which is 3:30 Eastern. So, all right. Thank you all, and we'll look forward to talking with you in your breakout groups. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy.
You betcha.